You ever notice this? Every time a major story breaks, the media gives you just enough to keep you glued to the screen, but never enough to actually understand what's going on. It's like they're dangling the carrot. They'll say, here's the suspect, here's the soundbite, here's a 30-second clip of outrage. But the bigger picture, the deeper context, that part never seems to make it into the segment. And that's what makes the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the questions swirling around Kash Patel, and the shadow that still hangs over Jeffrey Epstein feel connected. Because they all raise one brutal issue. We're not being told the whole story. And the parts left unsaid, those might be the most important of all. Think about it. How many times have you sat down, watched the evening news, and walked away feeling like something was missing? Like you were given puzzle pieces, but half the box was still empty. That's not an accident. That's how the system works. So let's look at those three names: Kirk, Patel, Epstein. Different people, totally different contexts, but their stories overlap in ways the mainstream never wants to talk about. Each one is like a window into how broken our institutions are, whether it's law enforcement, media, or politics. Charlie's death left way more questions than answers. Kash Patel, the guy's trying to mop up decades of rot at the FBI. And Epstein, well, that whole thing still reeks of secrets, cover-ups, and powerful people pulling strings. The media treats them like separate stories, but really they're all about the same fundamental problem: the massive gap between what we're told and what's actually happening. And that gap is getting wider by the day. Now, take Charlie's assassination. On paper, the official story sounds clean. Tyler Robinson was arrested. Law enforcement says it was one shooter. End of story, right? Neat, tidy, done. But here's where it gets weird. People are asking for more. They want ballistics reports. They want blood spatter analysis. They want extra video footage. And instead of answers, they're told to wait. Or worse, they're told those details don't matter. And you can't help but think, why? Let's pause here. Is that unusual? Not really, if you actually understand how investigations work. But here's the catch. Most of us don't. Most of us grew up on Law & Order or CSI, where every case gets solved in 45 minutes and the DNA report shows up right before the commercial break. In those shows, the evidence always arrives exactly when the script needs it. But that's not how real life works. Real criminal investigations are messy, they're slow, they're often boring. Cops and investigators aren't dramatic geniuses. They're piecing together leads, cross-referencing notes, running down dead ends. And sometimes the big breakthrough isn't cinematic. It happens at 4 a.m. when a detective connects two tiny dots no one had noticed before. Judge Joe Brown, the guy spent decades on the bench, has talked about this. He says, real cases unfold over weeks or months, not minutes. Evidence trickles in. Sometimes it's inconclusive. Sometimes it's useless. And sometimes the most important info never even makes it to the public until after a trial, because revealing it too early can blow the whole case. So when people scream, where's the ballistics report? In the Kirk shooting, here's the reality. Bullets from high-powered rifles often pass straight through. They end up buried in dirt, warped, fragmented, useless for anything other than confirming caliber. Same with blood spatter. Yeah, it can help show direction, but when you've already got multiple camera angles capturing what happened, that data becomes redundant. So maybe the real question isn't, why don't we have this report yet? Maybe it's, why do we feel like we should have it? And that takes us back to the culture. We've been conditioned by entertainment to expect instant gratification. We want answers now, clarity now, justice now. And when we don't get it, our imaginations fill in the blanks. That's where conspiracy theories grow. It's not always because people are paranoid. It's because there's a vacuum. When the official process moves slow and the media drip feeds selective details, the human brain hates that gap. It wants closure. So people start speculating. Was this a lone shooter? Could it have been a pro? Was it part of a bigger plan? Take one example. Some folks have been saying only a trained marksman could have hit Charlie at that distance. But here's what the media almost never bothers to mention. The average American deer hunter practices shots at around 400, 500 feet all the time. Millions of people in this country are capable of making that shot. You don't have to be Jason Bourne. You just need a decent rifle, a steady hand, and some experience. That doesn't mean there's nothing suspicious. It just means sometimes the truth is less exotic than the storylines we invent. But because we're conditioned by TV, and because trust in institutions is at rock bottom, every missing detail feels like proof of a cover-up. And that's the real danger here. When you've got Charlie Kirk's death raising questions, Kash Patel trying to fight entrenched corruption, and Epstein's ghost still haunting the halls of power, people connect the dots, even if the dots don't always line up. They sense the pattern, they feel the deception, and honestly, can you blame them? Because over and over, the public has been burned. Think about the Iraq WMD fiasco. Think about COVID origins. Think about Epstein himself, a guy who supposedly killed himself in a maximum security prison while the cameras malfunctioned. We've been lied to enough times that skepticism isn't crazy anymore. It's survival. So, yeah, when authorities say, don't worry about the ballistics, people roll their eyes. When the FBI promises they're rooting out corruption, but whistleblowers get punished, people stop believing. When Epstein's client list never sees the light of day, people assume the worst. That's the common thread. The distrust, the widening gap, and until institutions earn back trust by telling the whole story, not just curated fragments, people will keep filling the gaps themselves. Here's the thing, man. This idea that Charlie's shooter had to be some elite military sniper, it doesn't hold water. It's just not supported by the facts. A competent deer hunter with a decent rifle could make that shot. But the fact that so many people are clinging to that theory tells us something deeper about the world we're living in. We've spent the last 20, 25 years marinating in violence. It's everywhere. Movies, video games, cable news, even the way politics is framed now, conflict, violence, outrage, that's what sells. It's become normalized. But violence isn't just entertainment anymore. It's a ratings grab. It's a way to score clicks. And when violence is constantly being packaged as content, should we really be surprised that some people start treating it as a legitimate way to solve problems? That brings us right into the mess Kash Patel walked into when he took over at the FBI. This guy didn't inherit a clean professional shop full of law and order Boy Scouts. He inherited a century's worth of baggage, a bureaucracy layered with rot, a culture that goes all the way back to the Bureau's founding. Look, J. Edgar Hoover didn't just run the FBI for nearly half a century. He built it in his own image. And that image, it wasn't noble. Hoover figured out real quick that the Bureau's investigative powers could be weaponized. He collected dirt on politicians, judges, celebrities, anyone who could threaten him. He turned blackmail into a management tool. That's how he stayed in power so long. And when Hoover finally died in the 1,970 seconds, the institution didn't magically reset. Cultures don't vanish overnight. The people who had thrived under his system, the ones who learned how to play dirty to get ahead, they didn't disappear. They stayed. They trained the next generation. And those habits, that paranoia, that obsession with power, it kept flowing through the bloodstream of the FBI for decades. So when Patel shows up and says, let's focus on real law enforcement, not political games, he's not just dealing with today's problems. He's fighting ghosts. He's battling institutional muscle memory built before a lot of us were even born. He has to figure out who's actually committed to justice and who's just protecting their own turf. And that's not easy when the lines are blurred. Now, here's where Epstein comes in, because if you want to understand Patel's challenge, look at how he had to answer questions about the Epstein files. Congress wanted to know, why not just release everything? Shine the light, get it all out there. And Patel said, under oath, I released everything I had during my 7 months as director. Then he added this crucial detail. The only stuff withheld was blocked by federal judges because of ongoing cases. That's big. It tells us the FBI director himself wasn't playing keep away for political reasons. The holdup wasn't the Bureau. It was the courts. The judiciary saying this evidence has to stay sealed to protect prosecutions. But here's the uncomfortable possibility. What if some of those Epstein files don't even exist anymore? What if they were destroyed, lost, misplaced years ago under a totally different leadership with totally different priorities? We've seen this movie before. Hillary Clinton's emails, tons of them ended up in burn bags shredded according to protocol. Evidence in other high-profile cases, gone. So when Patel says he's released everything available, he might be telling the truth, but that doesn't mean the public will ever see what they want. Because if previous FBI bosses already made the call to bury certain materials, there's no magic wand Patel can wave to bring them back. And that right there exposes the bigger issue. Our justice system is packed with people who, frankly, are amateurs. They've got the fancy degrees, they pass the bar, they wear the robes, but they don't have the real-world grit. Think about it. If you're going in for surgery, you don't want a doctor who's only studied anatomy books. You want someone who's been in the OR 1,000 times. Someone who's seen complications, mistakes, surprises, and knows how to adapt. You want experience, not just theory. But in our legal system, we've got prosecutors who've never tried a case in front of a jury, judges who've never actually been in the trenches of a trial, officials making calls based on what looks good in a law library, not what works in the messy, unpredictable real world. And when you put that kind of inexperience in charge of sensitive investigations, you get disasters, evidence misplaced, files destroyed, cases mishandled, and the public, once again, left in the dark. So let's tie it back. Violence normalized in the culture. An FBI still haunted by Hoover's playbook, Epstein's files, half released and half lost, amateurs running critical pieces of the system. That's the environment Patel is trying to navigate. And it explains why Americans have so little trust left in the institutions that are supposed to protect them. Because if the system can't tell you the whole truth, or worse, if the truth was shredded years ago, how are you supposed to believe anything they say? Here's where the problem gets real ugly, man. It's one thing when you're talking about the FBI or some big federal bureaucracy screwing up. That feels distant for most people. But when you start looking at the local level, when it's your cops, your courts, your mayor's office, the consequences of incompetence hit people right where they live. Take Memphis, Tennessee. That city has become ground zero for what happens when institutional failure and practical inexperience collide. Memphis is sitting on one of the highest murder rates in the country, 50 to 60 homicides per 100,000 people every single year. To put that in perspective, a lot of suburban communities are basically at zero. None. So when you live in Memphis, your odds of getting caught up in violence aren't just bad, they're catastrophic. And it's not just numbers. The violence is so baked in now that people are changing how they live. Businesses are shutting down. Folks are scared to pump gas at night or use an ATM. Just doing basic everyday stuff has become risky. That's not freedom. That's not community. That's survival mode. Now, here's what makes Memphis such an interesting case and why it destroys a lot of the usual excuses. The leadership in that city is not lacking in diversity. You've got an African-American sheriff. The chief of police, an African-American woman. The mayor, African-American. County leadership, same thing. The majority of cops and deputy sheriffs, African-American. The city council reflects the demographics of the community. So when critics try to dismiss federal involvement in Memphis as some kind of racial targeting, they're missing the entire point. This isn't about race. This is about competence. It's about accountability. The people running the show look like the community they serve, and the community is still drowning in violence. The victims of this failure are overwhelmingly the same people who make up the leadership. So how is this about racial targeting? It's not. It's about a system that's failing its own people, no matter who's in charge. The priorities are way out of whack. You've got hundreds of millions of dollars getting thrown at hotel projects and shiny new sports facilities while basic public safety is collapsing. That's not racism. That's mismanagement. That's leadership deciding to polish the hood ornament while the engine falls apart. And it gets worse. There have been reports of crime stats being manipulated, like multiple shooting victims counted as one incident, so the numbers don't look as bad. That's not bias. That's dishonesty. That's leadership, cooking the books instead of fixing the problem. And when local officials push back against outside help because they're worried about how it looks politically, that's ego. That's pride. That's putting your own image ahead of people's safety. Sometimes the right thing to do is swallow your pride and admit you need help. That's why Trump's proposal to send in the National Guard isn't some crazy authoritarian overreach. It's literally how the system is designed to work. Our whole setup, city, county, state, federal, is built with layers for a reason. When the city can't handle it, the county steps in. If the county can't fix it, the state takes over. And if even that's not enough, that's when the feds show up. It's not tyranny. It's a safety net. But here's the kicker. A lot of local leaders resist that help, not because they think it won't work, but because accepting it feels like admitting failure. And that's backwards. The real failure is letting your city spiral into chaos while you cling to your pride. And you've got to zoom out here, because what's happening in Memphis is part of a much bigger cultural shift. We've moved from a society where violence was supposed to be a last resort to one where violence is normalized. It's everywhere, as entertainment, as political expression, even as some twisted version of justice. This didn't just happen overnight. Look back at the 1,950 seconds and 60 seconds. The nightly news was, 10 minutes? You get a straight, factual rundown of what happened that day. If there wasn't much news, they literally said nothing major today and rolled back into programming. The goal wasn't ratings. The goal was to inform. Then came the 24-hour news cycle. CNN, Fox, MSNBC. Suddenly, networks had to fill air all the time. And if there wasn't news worth reporting, they had to make it dramatic anyway. That meant more conflict, more sensationalism, more violence, because nothing grabs eyeballs like fear and outrage. Entertainment followed the same path. Movies and TV shows kept upping the ante. More blood, more gore, not because the story needed it, but because it sold tickets. Video games pushed it further. And then social media came in with algorithms that figured out the cheat code to the human brain: outrage, fear, anger. That's what keeps you scrolling. That's what keeps you engaged. So when you put all that together, 24/7's news, milking violence for ratings, Hollywood glorifying it, video games normalizing it, and social media rewarding it, you get a culture marinated in violence. And if that's the culture, is it really surprising that violence is spilled out into politics, into communities, into daily life? That's the environment Memphis is drowning in. That's the environment Charlie Kirk was assassinated in. That's the environment Kash Patel has to fight through at the FBI. Violence isn't just a problem we deal with now and then. It's a feature of the system. It's the background noise of American life. And until we get honest about that, until we admit that our institutions are failing and our culture is hooked on violence like a drug, places like Memphis will keep being war zones, and leaders will keep pretending that shiny new hotels or stadiums can distract from the blood on the streets. You know what's wild, man? Somewhere along the way, politicians figured out that violent rhetoric works. Not just in some fringe way, but as a real strategy to fire up their base. And it's not just one side doing it. Both parties have leaned into it. They talk about opponents like they're enemies to be crushed, not fellow citizens to debate. You've got public officials straight up encouraging harassment, confrontation, even physical intimidation, and it filters down. It's like monkey see, monkey do. Now you've got average people acting out the same script. A disagreement at a school board meeting, shouting match. A beef online, threats in the DMs. Journalists doing their jobs, death threats in their inboxes. None of these are isolated incidents anymore. It's a cultural environment where violence has become normalized. And if you drop somebody from the 1,950 seconds into 2025, they'd be shocked. They'd say, wait, we don't settle things with conversation anymore? It's just threats and violence? That cultural backdrop is key for understanding why Charlie Kirk's assassination sparked so much conspiracy talk. In a world where violence is everywhere, movies, politics, social media, people naturally look for patterns. They start assuming that big events must have big, dramatic explanations. A lone, unstable guy pulling a trigger, that's harder for people to accept than a theory about professional assassins or government plots. We've been conditioned to think every act of violence has layers of meaning because violence is treated like narrative fuel in this culture. And here's where the media pours gasoline on the fire. News networks don't just report violence anymore. They package it. They turn it into a story arc. They roll out panels of talking heads. And here's the thing. A lot of those talking heads don't know jack about what they're talking about. They're academics. They're think tank types. They've got resumes full of papers and conferences, but zero experience in the real trenches. These are people who've never sat across from a witness, never put handcuffs on anyone, never stared at a crime scene trying to figure out what went down. But there they are on TV explaining exactly how an investigation should unfold, what evidence should exist, and what conclusions we should draw. They talk smooth, they sound authoritative, but it's theory stacked on theory. That's where the disconnect hits. Viewers sit at home watching this commentary and they absorb these unrealistic expectations. They expect every investigation to deliver results instantly with total transparency and a Hollywood ending. And when reality doesn't match that script, distrust, frustration, suspicions of cover-ups. You saw it play out with Kash Patel's testimony in front of Congress. And most officials, when they get grilled, they hide behind bureaucratic word salads. We can't comment on ongoing investigations. I'll have to get back to you. They give you nothing because nothing is safer. But Patel, he came in hot. No dancing, no hedging. He slapped back at Congress, called out grandstanding when he saw it, answered bluntly. And people freaked out in a good way. Because when's the last time you saw a government official actually talk straight? No committee-approved talking points, no lawyer-sanitized language, just direct answers. That's rare. So rare that when it happens, people don't even know how to process it. Some called it disrespectful. Others said it was exactly what accountability should look like. Here's the problem, though. Most officials will never follow Patel's example. Why? Because it's dangerous. You speak bluntly in D.C., you get crucified. The media rips you apart. Political enemies weaponize your words. Your career takes a hit. So the safe play is to stick to scripted nothingness. Protect yourself. Avoid saying anything real. And the cost of that cowardice, public trust evaporates. Think about it. If every official you see sounds like a PR robot, you're going to assume they're hiding something. And when that pattern repeats across multiple administrations, across both parties, across every agency, you end up with exactly what we've got now, a public that doesn't trust a damn thing the government says. And nothing proves that point, like Jeffrey Epstein. The skepticism surrounding that case isn't just conspiracy nuts connecting dots with red string. It's rooted in lived experience. People have seen powerful figures skate by without accountability. They've seen evidence disappear. They've seen institutions cover their own asses instead of pursuing truth. Epstein is the perfect storm of all that. It's not just about his crimes. It's about what his crimes symbolize. Wealth and connections shielding monsters. Judges sealing evidence. Agencies dragging their feet. Names protected, not exposed. For the average person, Epstein became proof that there's a whole tier of society playing by different rules. So when Patel says, I released everything I had, it's both believable and frustrating. Believable because what motive does he have to protect Epstein's friends? None. Frustrating because it means the files people want most may have been destroyed or buried long before Patel showed up. If past FBI leaders shredded evidence, there's nothing left to release. That's a nightmare scenario. Technically, Patel's telling the truth, but the truth doesn't satisfy anyone. And here's the broader lesson. Once institutional credibility is gone, you can't rebuild it with a press release. You can't patch it with nice words. You need years of consistent, honest action. You need to prove over and over that you'll put truth above self-protection, that you'll admit past failures instead of pretending they didn't happen. And almost nobody in power wants to do that because admitting past failures opens you up. It makes you vulnerable. It forces you to share responsibility. So instead, they double down on spin. And every time they do it, trust slips further away. It's a pattern across everything. FBI, Congress, media, courts. The names change, the scandals shift, but the formula is the same. Elites talk in circles. Institutions protect themselves. The public gets crumbs and spin. And over time, suspicion stops being fringe and starts being default. People stop asking, is there a cover-up? And start assuming, Of course there's a cover-up. That's where we are now. And unless something dramatic shifts, unless more people like Patel are willing to talk bluntly and take the hits, the gap between the people and the institutions will just keep growing. And every tragedy, every scandal, every assassination will generate not just grief, but theories. Because in a society drowning in violence, in a culture addicted to spin, the truth feels like the rarest commodity of all. Here's the big question, man. Whether you're talking about federal agencies, local government, cops on the beat, or the media itself, how the hell do you rebuild trust once people have good reasons not to trust you anymore? That's the monster under the bed. Because people don't lose faith out of nowhere. They lose it after decades of being lied to, ignored, or straight up failed. Memphis is a perfect example. Look at what's happening there right now. This isn't about abstract policy debates or partisan spin. It's about a city where basic public safety has collapsed. Residents aren't angry at their leaders because of race or party labels. The leadership in Memphis reflects the community almost exactly. They're angry because they can't pump gas at night without looking over their shoulder. They're angry because businesses are closing due to theft and violence. They're angry because kids can't play outside safely. That's not politics, that's survival. And when local officials refuse outside help because they don't want to look bad, that's not leadership, that's ego. That's putting your image ahead of your people. If you're the mayor or the chief and you'd rather watch neighborhoods fall apart than admit you need help, then you're failing the very people who put you in office. The stats tell the story clear as day. Memphis is consistently ranked near the top of the list for America's most violent cities. Homicide rates that make other places look like paradise, 50 to 60 murders per 100,000 residents. And behind every number is a family wrecked, a community scarred. But numbers don't even capture the day-to-day reality. Think about it. Restaurants shutting down permanently, entertainment venues boarded up, parks and public spaces that families won't step into after dark. That's the death of community life. And it's not happening because of a lack of money. Memphis has gotten plenty of federal and state support. They've run outreach programs. They've launched crime prevention initiatives. But the fundamental relationship between law enforcement and the community is broken. And until that's fixed, no amount of money will make a difference. And priorities? Completely upside down. Hundreds of millions are being thrown at flashy tourism projects, hotel developments, sports arenas. Meanwhile, the neighborhoods rot. Streets aren't safe. Crime stats are allegedly being massaged, so it looks like things are improving when everyone on the ground knows they're not. That's not just mismanagement. That's dishonesty. And dishonesty destroys trust faster than anything. This is where the federal government comes in. And I know some people hear federal intervention and their hair stands up. They think tyranny. They think overreach. But here's the deal. Our system was designed with layers for a reason. Local government handles local problems. If they can't, the county steps up. If the county can't, the state steps in. And if even that's not enough, then the feds have to act. That's not dictatorship. That's the Constitution. That's why Trump's idea to send the National Guard into Memphis wasn't some power grab. It was a recognition of reality. People in that city deserve to live without constant fear. They deserve to walk to school, go to work, and run errands without worrying about getting shot. That's not politics. That's a moral responsibility. But the resistance to it is political. Local leaders don't want federal help because it makes them look weak. But here's the truth. Weakness isn't asking for help. Weakness is letting your city bleed out while you protect your reputation. And that lesson goes way beyond Memphis. It shows how institutional failure trickles up. When city leadership collapses, the state has to step in. When the state struggles, the feds get involved. That's how the system was designed. But when politics gets in the way, when leaders are more worried about headlines than results, ordinary people are the ones who pay the price. That's the same dynamic we see in Charlie Kirk's assassination, in Patel's fight with the FBI, and the endless Epstein mess. Public demand slams into institutional reality. People want answers now. They want accountability. They want justice. But institutions are slow, messy, and often corrupt. They hide their failures behind process. And the longer they stall, the more people lose faith. And here's the thing. Results are all that matter, not promises. not press releases, results. Memphis residents don't care how many initiatives have been announced. They want to be able to go outside at night. People don't care how many times FBI directors testify in front of Congress. They want to know the Epstein files are real and complete. Americans don't care about commitments to reform. They want institutions that actually work. And that's where you, the citizen, come in, because your role isn't passive. You can't just watch CNN or Fox, scroll your feed, and hope someone else fixes this. That's not how democracy works. You've got to engage, ask the tough questions, push for real answers, hold officials accountable, don't settle for spin. That means you got to go deeper than the headlines. Don't stop at the first story you hear. Look for multiple sources. Compare facts. Ask yourself, what's being left out? What's being glossed over? Half the time, the truth is in the details they don't tell you. And just as important, you've got to separate legit concerns from conspiracy fantasies. Because the more time people waste chasing nonsense, the easier it is for institutions to dodge the real issues. Charlie Kirk's death isn't proof of some Hollywood-style assassination ring. It's proof of how broken our culture has become around violence and politics. The Epstein files aren't a Netflix thriller. They're evidence of a system that protects the powerful and leaves everyone else in the dark. Focus on the real problems. And remember, the goal isn't just to point fingers. It's to find solutions. Blame is easy. Solutions are hard. But solutions are what rebuild trust. So ask yourself, are our institutions serving the public interest effectively? Are they keeping communities safe? Are they transparent with evidence? Are they accountable when they screw up? If the answer is no, don't just complain. Demand better. Use your voice. Use your vote. And don't forget, the media isn't the gatekeeper anymore. You don't have to accept their curated version of reality. You've got access to more sources than ever. Use them. Think critically. Share truth when you find it. Challenge leaders when they dodge. If you believe the media isn't telling the full story, then it's on us to spread it.